I have to give the rules of the giveaway quickly before I get into the video, so just bear with me for a second. Throughout the video, 10 numbers will be hidden on screen. Some will be obvious and some will be difficult to find, but they're all there, trust me. These numbers will assemble to be a phone number. The first person to find all 10 and text a screenshot to that number proving they are subscribed to me wins a season pass to the park of their choice next year. Some restrictions may apply, like you're not going to get a Disney AP for example, but we can figure that out after you text me. Good luck, happy hunting, and here's your first number to get you started. Right off the bat, I am going to make an insane sounding claim. 2023 will literally make or break the entire business structure B&M has in America at its foundation. I can justify that claim, but as always on this channel, we have to look at a little bit of history first. Funnily enough, B&M isn't even the company that we have to have a good enough grasp on to understand the conclusion that I just came to. Nearly 20 years before the first B&M coaster, Aerodynamics came out with the first ever modern looping coaster with the opening of Corkscrew at Knott's Berry Farm. This sent waves through the amusement industry, starting what I call the inversion wars. Every park wanted to have the chance to have the coaster with the most inversions, and Aero was happy to make these parks' dreams come true. Starting with 2 inversions at Knott's, Aero would go on to design 3 inversions for Cedar Point, 4 inversions for Carowinds, 5 for Darien Lake, 6 for Kings Island, and 7 for Six Flags Great America. There was no company as impactful and on fire as Aero at this point in the game. Enthusiasts and GP alike flocked to parks in droves to experience the latest and greatest creations by this company. Aero was not limited to loopers, they also invented the first ever suspended coaster as well as the first ever hyper coaster. Going into the 90s, Aero seemed invincible. If you know anything about Aero though, you'll know that even this giant in the industry had its Achilles heel. The 90s were not as kind to Aero as the 70s and 80s. Their list of record breakers and notable attractions really takes a dive during this decade. But why? Well, there's really 2 main reasons for this, one being their lack of innovation after their heyday, and the other being competition. Once known as the primary innovator in the industry, Aero decided that they were too good to use CAD to design their roller coasters. They continued designing and profiling their rides by hand, which ultimately led to cookie-cutter elements slapped together in different orders to make slightly different rides. This worked out well during the race for most inversions, as the concept of inverting on a roller coaster was still new, so parks and parkgoers did not care as much about how exactly they got inverted. Once it became clear that in essence if you've ridden one Aero looper you've ridden them all, the model that made Aero famous lost its luster. That left them with the suspended coaster and the hyper coaster. This is where competition comes into play. Aero had their back against the wall with the debut of the B&M Invert in 1992. Their niche of being under the track was being challenged by a ride with a more comfortable, more intense, and more capacity-focused model. Aero could not keep up, and they assembled their last ever suspended coaster in 1993. All that was left was the hyper coaster. They skated by with this model and the occasional Mine Trainer looper throughout the 90s until 1999 saw the addition of 2 B&M hypers and 1 Intamin hyper. Aero was on the ropes with little room left to squirm. Aero knew they had to come out swinging, so what did they do? Throw out the literal most insane ride idea they had, and see if it stuck, of course. They wanted to do something no one had ever done before, and no one has ever done since. Well, kind of, I'll get into that in a moment. Aero added a 4th dimension to a roller coaster. What does that mean? Basically, there's an additional rail on the track that's designed to rotate riders forwards or backwards as the ride progresses. This allows for maneuvers never before possible, such as a skydive first drop. Riders literally got spun to be face down during a 90-degree drop before rotating into the next element. This ride completely is larger than life, but unfortunately so was the price tag. Ultimately, Aero paid for this coaster with every penny they had and went bankrupt before it was completed. All of their assets have been sold off to S&S, who went on to make one more traditional 4th dimension coaster and a couple different models inspired by 4th dimension coasters. Aero as we know it ceases to exist and will likely never return to the amusement industry. So, what does this have to do with B&M anyway? Well, honestly, I find a lot of parallels between Aero and B&M. Let's pick up with B&M where we left off, 1999. This year debuted not only the Hyper model, but also their floorless. These 2 models and the aforementioned inverts would go on to be 3 of their most popular models, along with the dive coaster that debuted just a year earlier. B&M was ready to take on the 2000s by storm. This decade saw the addition of 24 coasters across America, with many more worldwide. That includes floorless, inverts, dives, hypers, sitting coasters, and flying coasters. Parks could not get enough of B&M during this area, which seemingly decreased a bit in the 2010s. B&M made 11 coasters in America in the 2010s. These were spread across wing, dive, hyper, stand-up, and floorless coasters, and also assume that you count a stand-up to floorless conversion as a new coaster. What caused this decrease in purchases? I suspect a few things. Firstly, similar to Aero, B&M does not do much innovation. They have their elements they like, and they shuffle them around in as many ways as possible. To put this in perspective, it was considered a big deal that B&M added a wave turn to Orion in 2020. A wave turn. An element attributed to first appearing in Outlaw Run in 2013. That's how long it took B&M to change up their formula even the slightest bit. Secondly, B&M coasters are in no way cheap. To add Dr. Diabolical, the newest dive coaster, Six Flags had to increase its season pass prices. Any smaller park than a big chain simply cannot afford B&Ms, with a few notable exceptions like Holiday World and Hershey. These parks are kind of in their own league though, so I'll move on from that. Thirdly, just like Aero in 1999, B&M has some killer competition right now. RMC is dominating the whole industry, Mach has some really good loopers, Vekoma is finally starting to expand back into America, which means we'll probably get some good inverts soon. Multiple manufacturers are expanding into redefining the hyper as more than just airtime hill after airtime hill, and not many people really want stand-up or floorless coasters right now, so they don't need competition in that area. Ultimately, this is not why I think B&M is in a similar situation to Aero though. I really think B&M expanded too fast and aggressively in the late 90s and 2000s, and that was their downfall. Because of the cost of their coasters and inherently limited customer base, B&M essentially put a limit on where they can build coasters. This limit means that everybody bought what they wanted and the demand for B&Ms dropped rapidly. The only chain I can really see working with B&M a lot going forward is SeaWorld. Six Flags is simply too broke. Cedar Fair milked B&M dry over the last 10 years since they're falling out with Intamin in terms of what they can order for making logical business sense. Universal and Disney have a combined total of 1 B&M in America with Hulk, and Hershey has 2, with the only park that I could see adding one in the future being Dollywood, but they appear to be focusing on family-style attractions recently. Essentially, to stay relevant in America, B&M needs to expand its profile as fast as its number of coasters, but with the last new coaster model of theirs coming out in 2011, they fell rapidly behind. So where does that leave B&M today? They're currently trying to build and release a new model as of writing this script called the Surf Coaster. SeaWorld is building this coaster because, of course they are. Like I said, they're really all B&M has left. I have heard every rumor under the sun about this coaster and what it entails, but the general consensus is that it is a multi-launch coaster fairly similar to an Intamin multi-launcher Blitz. Another notable thing about it is the 2 across seating, or standing. Some people think it might be a standing coaster, I don't know. Traditionally, B&M coasters have 4 across seating, or that awesome staggered seating that some hypers have. All we have really seen for this is concept art and the track being on site at SeaWorld, as well as having an anticipated opening date of 2023 and the most vague trailer possible for a coaster that we know is already actively being manufactured. Take note of one thing in particular. This is a launch coaster. B&M has finally hopped on board with the popularity of launch coasters, but I fear this is a little too late and will be their equivalent of the Fourth Dimension coaster, but for a totally different reason. While the Fourth Dimension was so amazingly different from what anyone had ever seen, making it too dangerous of a gamble leading to the failure of Aero, I see the Surf Coaster as too safe of a business decision. Why should a company buy a B&M launch coaster when they can buy a Mach, Intamin, Vekoma, SNS, or technically even an RMC? B&M got into the launch market too late in my opinion, and I fear that this will cause the Surf Coaster to be their dumpster fire model that sends them down the path to being obsolete in America. Does this mean I think B&M will vanish like Aero? No, I think they have a strong enough international presence to kind of pull an Intamin or Vekoma. They can take some time to do work in Europe and Asia, prototyping some new cutting-edge models along the way before ramping back up in America slowly and in a calculated manner. I do fear that B&M as we know it might be gone within a few years though. Let me know what you think down below. I hope you found all the numbers, and if you made it this far, tell me your favorite B&M coaster in the comments. I'm Josh from Station Wait. Have a great day.